Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pestana. And we're here today with special guest, Sarah Grace, who's here to share with us her new book, Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. So Sarah is a powerful and dynamic individual who spent 15 years merging her career as a paramedic in some of California's busiest 911 systems, and with her innate clairvoyant and intuitive abilities. So let's welcome to the show, Sarah Grace.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. There's so much in your book I want to explore with you. My goodness, what a story. Why don't you start from the beginning? What was it like growing up?
Well, it's really been quite an odyssey, to be honest with you. I grew up in a tiny town in South Dakota, pre internet. So there was no connection or contact with the outside world. And, I was a normal kid until the age of 7. And one day I just woke up and I could see colors around people and I could sense their thoughts. I could feel their feelings. I could start to see disease in people's bodies, and it kind of went on from there. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what to make of it, and I was just a kid, so I thought it was like, must be normal. Everybody must be like this. But I expected it to go away, and it didn't. And so after a few weeks, I finally asked a family member about it. And unfortunately, my family dynamic was really volatile and unstable and very conservative. And so when I started talking about, seeing spirits and colors, they did the hellfire and brimstone bit. And so that really frightened me because I thought that there was something really wrong mentally with me. And, they had said, don't talk about this out loud or, you'll get sent away. And so that really started my kind of odyssey with toxic shame and the long journey to finally becoming empowered and understanding my abilities. So I can take you all the way down the rabbit hole with everything that I went through to get there. But ultimately, I became a paramedic and was able to use those abilities in the 911 system in moments of death and crises to really help a lot of people.
I can relate to that so much. I used to see angels as a kid, told my parents, and they're like, oh, no, you're not a priest or nun, so you can't see any of those. And
Right.
it's really interesting when you talk about just how there's this like family shame or, it's something you just don't talk about.
Right. Fortunately, now collectively, we as a society have come a long way in our openness towards this topic. But when we were growing up, and especially where I was in the area of the country, man, there was like, no help, no understanding, no support. And yeah, definitely not an understood thing at the time.
I think there are a lot of people that can relate to that. And then, so you have this amazing giftedness, and at what point were you like, okay, this is something I just need to be quiet about and develop on my own? What was that development like?
Oh, well, since I had developed a fear that there was something mentally wrong with me, that's a highly stigmatized thing in our, culture. And so I closeted it right then and there. And so I ultimately spent 25 years in the closet. And as a result of that and the volatility of my family and upbringing, I went kind of off the rails in my late teens, early 20s, just really looking for a sense of safety and personal power. And I got into drugs and alcohol as a way of coping with the stimulus, because essentially my reality is like kind of like almost being on acid in Times Square, 24/7. It's just a barrage of sensory data that never really shuts off. And so, since I didn't understand it and I didn't have any help with it, of course, it was very overwhelming. And I actually hit bottom and rock bottom, and I overdosed and had a near death experience when I was like 19, 20. And that experience really began my journey towards a very slow, long, tedious process towards accepting this. But when I was in the near death experience in an expanded state, essentially I was shown, like there was a female voice and she was very eloquent. And she, for the most part, was like, we get it's hard, you know, and should you choose to come back, you're actually going to be able to help a lot of people with this. And so obviously I chose, to live and to stay embodied. And it's funny because I assumed when I was in that expanded state that because I was choosing to come back, that they would kind of lay it all out for me and tell me what to do. But that's not how it went. I came back. I had to get myself cleaned up. I had to really face my own shadow, do a lot of trauma integration work. I had to deal with multiple addictions. And I had to face my fear and my kind of stigma and skepticism around psychic, intuitive, energetic world. So I fumbled along for a long time, but ultimately my intuition led me towards 911. And every time an ambulance would go by, because I did a bunch of stuff, I was a model, I was doing all these things, but it was really shallow and superficial. And so every time an ambulance would go by, my intuition was like, that, you should be doing that. And I was so scared of it. I was like, no way, man. Like, I could kill people. Like, I don't know how to do that. But I didn't understand at the time that there's a million steps between where you first start and then when you're on your own as a senior level paramedic. So ultimately, I fumbled around and moved all over the country and then found my way finally to the UCLA EMT program. And that's when I started my journey as in EMS as a paramedic in the 911 system. And I started in South Central Los Angeles. And that's when it all kind of began.
Well, you definitely picked a quiet neighborhood, huh?
Yeah. I'm one of those go big or go home types. I'm like all in, we're going to live this out.
Oh, my goodness.
Honestly, it was incredible because the chaos and instability and violence that I grew up with on a daily basis actually had me very comfortable and familiar in the 911 system. It was almost like a duck to water. And I found, like, for the first 6 months, my abilities were relatively muted because I think I was just so busy trying to learn how to run a 911 call. There's so many levels that go to that and people involved, and it's kind of like a symphony. And once I became proficient at understanding, the EMT assists the paramedic and drives the ambulance. The fire captain is the guy holding the clipboard, usually has a handlebar mustache, like I got my footing in that way. Then the energy started to come through me again. And so my experience on 911 calls would be very matrix-like. Everything would slow down. My energy field would expand. Anytime death was near, I would taste metal, which I always found interesting. And I became the paramedic who was always there for death and extreme crises. But at first, I was really freaked out because I had the first dead body I saw was my own mother. But up until that point, hadn't been around it that much. And so it was a lot. But over time, I really began noticing that I would somehow just know what was going to happen before it did, which gave me an advantage on the calls. I knew if the person was about to die, and I could actually see like their deceased relatives come in to the room. I could watch their chakra systems release and watch the soul exit out the crown while we were doing CPR. And it became kind of this really intricate dance that, again, I was still very quiet about. I didn't want anyone to know. EMS is a very alpha masculine field. So I didn't want to be the weird girl who like sees colors in dead people, but I was quiet about it and gained in proficiency on the calls and ultimately was able to really utilize it to benefit a lot of people.
That must have been just remarkable to see that experience and being there for people when they're taking their last breath. I mean, how did you feel about that?
Honestly, I I consider it a true blessing. I mean, you think about the birth and death cycle and all of the experiences and all of the people, that individual had encountered in their lifetime. And to be there in their final moments, especially if it was a traumatic death, car accident, drive-by shooting, you know, building collapse, whatever it was, being able to be there and kind of hold that space, if you will, and comfort them while watching the energy leave their body, it became almost like midwifing. And ultimately, I was blessed to witness probably anywhere 20, 30 actual, like, watch them die, and then hundreds of dead bodies in all, various capacities of decomposition and etc. And ultimately, I was able to just really, like, wow, like, this is this is incredible, and it really transformed my own personal view on death. I think culturally we are death phobic. And really, I came to understand that it's like graduation. There's nothing to fear in it, because I would see the loved ones come in and greet the soul, or, again, on a traumatic call, I would see angels come in to support the soul while they were coming to terms with the fact that their body was down on the ground and they were out of it. And it was incredible to witness.
What did it look like when you had somebody that died and then came back?
Usually those guys would just expand outwardly. So their auric field the auric field is roughly 9 feet circumferential. And it would expand, 12, 16 feet out, and it would thin. So it would get very diffuse. And, or I would see their soul kind of like hovering, perhaps standing next to the body. And then we would, of course, be doing CPR, intubating, starting the IVs, giving the medications, doing what we needed to do. And then ultimately, it seemed as though some had that same choice point that I had in my overdose, where it's like you can choose to exit and graduate, if you will, or you can choose to stay. And if they chose to stay, then once we got the heart restarted, then the little tiny, it was almost like a spider web that would go out from the heart chakra, and that would really connect back in, and they'd kind of sink back into their body.
Wow, what an amazing experience to be there. And you're right. I mean, we're in a culture that is afraid of death.
Mhm.
Is overcoming fears about death is something that you want to help people through?
Oh, for sure. I really find that we're so fearful of death that I would say almost the majority of people don't really live, because they're so scared. They may be scared to fail. They may be scared to get hurt. Ultimately, they may be scared to die. But what that does is it dampens their light and their veracity for life. And then it's kind of like a half lived life, if you will. There's a lot of people in our culture that are walking around almost dead already. It's almost kind of like catatonic, right? So if we peel back the veil and share some of the experience, that it's not anything to fear, then perhaps we can help people to, embrace more life more fully.
Being able to really be alive in the moment. I think you're right. And many of us, I've done it too, where it's like we're going through the day and we're kind of just doing this repetition throughout a
Mm,
year of work, come home, sleep, eat, work out, whatever.
absolutely. Yeah.
So when you come across a scene that there was a traumatic death, what was different from that versus someone who had passed away in their bed?
That's an awesome question, because I noticed there was a significant difference in terms of what the soul experiences as they exit. So, in a hospice death or something that's expected, like a medical death, the auric field would begin to expand. And we hear about this all the time in NDE stories now, where people are like, they're, loved ones come in and, the people visiting can't see them, but the person who's dying is like, oh, so and so is here. Or they can astral travel really easily and go to anywhere in the world where their loved ones are. So again, it would kind of be this expanded, diffuse state of the auric field that could last anywhere from weeks to days to hours. And then at the moments of death, I noticed that there's this really cool organized rhythm to how the chakras release. And it almost looks like a ribbon unfurling. So it starts at the base, at the tailbone, and it will unfurl through all of the chakras until the soul goes out the crown. And that is, I come to understand, that's what the light at the end of the tunnel is, right? We hear about that all the time. Well, the consciousness is releasing itself through the physical anatomy, and that's the light at the end of the tunnel. And so the soul would kind of come out the crown, and sometimes it just looked like a fine mist. If somebody was totally over it and just not into living anymore, it would kind of just be like a little puff, like not a lot of energy. But ultimately, I would 9 times out of 10 see deceased family members, pets, or if somebody was particularly religious, some religious archetypes would come in. And then they would kind of have this celebration up, usually in the corner of the ceiling, and then they would just disappear. So that was kind of the organized medical. Now on a traumatic, this was really interesting because you got to understand, and this is again why I just advocate you guys, just live now, because I can't tell you how many people I ran calls on and worked CPR calls on that had no idea they were going to die that day. They're going through the Starbucks drive-through, they come out, they're distracted, and they get T-boned or something, and that's it, right? And it could be literally that simple. So we would come on scene, say it's a motor vehicle accident on the freeway, and we would stabilize everything, and I would say it's a crumpled body in the car, right? And I would see the soul standing next to the vehicle, and the soul looks like the person except translucent, so I could see through them. And telepathically, they had an awareness. And I think it's because, like mediums, they, like dead spirits, dead people, just know that mediums can see them. So they kind of swarm around. I think that that's there's an understanding in that expanded state that they could tell that I could see them, and they could tell I could hear them telepathically. So I would come on scene and be like, essentially, I figured out kind of my own protocol. Of course, we got to get the body out of the car, start working the CPR and dealing with all of that. But ultimately, I would start explaining to the soul telepathically, okay, you were in a car accident, you're dead, we're going to take you to the hospital, this is what's happening. And usually they just kind of stood there in shock, right? And then ultimately, most times an angel or a celestial would come on scene. And it was incredible to witness, because if you think of a crumpled up car, maybe there's fire, there's people running around, it's kind of a chaotic scene. And all of a sudden it would start like little fireflies, and it would gain an intensity of light until it formed this celestial. And these guys are usually pretty huge, like 10 feet tall, very calm, very tranquil, a lot of cobalt blue energy. They wouldn't really ever talk, and they would just blanket the entire scene with this calm. And in that moment, the soul would start to be curious about, well, wait, what is this? And start to turn towards the angel. And then ultimately, I watched many times as the soul finally came to understand that they just died, and then they would disappear with the angel.
That's just remarkable. My goodness. Did the souls have a color to them themselves? Or I know you said they were translucent.
Yeah, usually if it was a trauma, you're in your body 1 second and then you're out of your body. And so usually they looked like whatever they were, like whatever clothes they were wearing, whatever their hair looked like, except it's all just see-through. It's all just data. And then my understanding is as they cross with the celestial and go into life review and all that stuff, we take different form, if you will, but usually on a trauma call, it just looked like them, you know. It was most of the time relatively beautiful to see, shocking, of course, because they were trying to understand and grasp. And I ran a lot of calls on really young people, and it's a mind bender, when you got kids that are your age or younger that just got popped out of their body due to domestic violence or whatever. And there was the shock, but then finally the softening, and then kind of the completion or crossing. But I did have a couple of very challenging ones to witness where the soul was literally clawing at the body, trying to get back in and couldn't. And so that was really hard for me, to watch.
I think that would be hard for anybody, to
Mm-hmm.
being in a situation where you're seeing that. And do the souls look at you for help?
Oh, yeah. I mean, wide-eyed desperation, of course, they're translucent. And then when I'm in an expanded state, I can feel what they're feeling, which was one of the more challenging aspects of being so sensitive on a 911 call, because blood and guts, like to people like me, people in EMS, we're kind of a rare, or, we're a unique breed. Like we're running towards what everybody else is running away from. So there's something hardwired in us to be able to come into the chaos and handle it. And so it's not the body parts, the blood and guts, the brain matter. It's none of that that's shocking. It was always the mother's scream when, her child just died. That hands down is the most haunting thing across the board for all first responders. And then for me, being so sensitive, that would go right into my system and just reverberate. And so initially when I first started, I was like, there's no way I can do this. It's just too much. But then over time, my guides and my intuition just kind of kept showing me signs yes, you can. And so ultimately I figured out ways, and it was probably 10 years. I did 15 years total 911. So I was in South Central Los Angeles, and then I went up California into San Jose and Sacramento 911. So very urban areas, high call volume. But I still was really scared that I was different, and I didn't, I just wanted to fit in. I finally had a socially acceptable job. I was esteemed in society for once, and I was I don't want to be ostracized because of this. And so I didn't say anything, but ultimately I can give you a couple more calls that finally led me to being okay, what is this? Why am I like this? Why do I see these things? Why do I hear these things and feel and know and all of it?
Well, I think that would be a very important question is, why do you think that you have this level of giftedness? Because it's quite extraordinary.
Yes. It's a blessing and a curse for sure. And it's been such a long road towards acceptance with it, and a lot of self-acceptance around it. Again, fortunately, we're, advancing collectively, and there's more open conversation about this type of thing. But for me, I really had to face a lot of what I had done to myself as a result of the shame, and I think that's such a relatable thing, because we as humans are just doing the best we can. There's no playbook here, and a lot of us are wounded. And, there's all kinds of different coping mechanisms and ways that we get a sense of identity and power. And as a result of the shame and not having a strong family and just all the things, I was kind of out there on my own, flapping in the wind. And I had done a lot of things. So for my healing journey, I had to begin the process of self-forgiveness there. And then ultimately I had to get over my skepticism, to just be honest with you. I was so not into the psychic thing, so not into there's a stigma in our society, and so I didn't really want to be part of it, especially since I was over here in the alpha dog SWAT dude world, fitting in. And so I had to soften my judgment, and I had to come to terms with the fact that it's okay, besides really hardcore drugs, accelerants, there's like nothing that diminishes my stimulus. And I had quit those drugs when I had healed myself at the overdose. So I was really had to come to a part of self acceptance and just being like, all right, this, I don't have to like it. This isn't like super fun, but this is what it is for me, right? This is how it is. So accept it, Sarah. And what are you going to do about it? Like, how are you going to learn what to take care of your system because you're different? And so I got over my judgment and stigma, ultimately started with yoga, basic stuff, yoga, meditation, learning to connect breath with movement, learning to meditate and expand my state of awareness. And then from there, I went into Reiki, shamanism, many, many branches of shamanism, both the basic levels and more advanced, like plant medicine levels, and medical intuition, mediumship, kundalini, energy healing, holistic healing. So I've done all of these different experiences now, over the last long while. And I've really learned a lot of different tools and understandings about, okay, so you can see things. So that's clairvoyance, right? Okay, so that's third eye and that's the pineal. And is it calcified? And how do you work with it? And, just like taking each one of the gifts and breaking it down, right? To make it make sense. And then, so now I just understand how to thrive, physically with all of the stimulus.
I've often heard of first responders that go through the secondary trauma, and we just expect so much of our first responders, and not everyone's able to work through that trauma.
Oh, no, we have a huge incidence of suicide in first responders right now. Again, so we are a unique breed. We do have that within us. And when you are in the belly of the beast, dealing with the darkest aspects of humanity's collective consciousness, day after day after day, that'll just grind you down, And so it is softening in terms of first responders being able to like open up and share. When I first got in, however many years ago, 20, whatever years ago, it was not at all open. Now it is opening, but we still are seeing a tremendous amount of suicides. And I don't think many people realize, this is just kind of an adjunct, that first responders, like private ambulance first responders especially, make less than McDonald's workers in a lot of places. Did you know that?
I had no clue about that, and that is awful. That should be changed immediately.
Yeah. So 75% of the US is still covered by volunteer. First, we got to understand that. Okay. And then in the urban settings, the fire departments usually get paid decent because that's coming from the tax base. But the transport medics on the private ambulance companies, the EMTs, I think New York right now is like 45 or 55,000. It's nothing. Like, it's not even barely a livable wage. And so we do it because it's a calling. We do it because we're built for it, but it's like not a sustainable thing energetically, soulfully, financially, whatever. And so it's just, it's a pretty huge machine. And we are the people literally coming in. And this is why it's important to have people understand, like, we're the people coming into your worst nightmare, right? So it's like, we want those guys to be paid, so that they don't have to take second jobs. Yeah.
And we want them paid, and paid well, as they should be, because my goodness, the times I think of having to call an ambulance for a family member, I didn't want to, none of us want to think about, are they like burnt out because they're taking a second job? My goodness.
Yeah. It's not something that's really talked about openly. So thanks for the ability to kind of get this awareness out there.
I'm more than happy to do that. When you put your hands on somebody, what is that like for you?
So if I put my hands on you, I can actually go into your, what I call now, the grid infrastructure. And so it's almost like being in a tiny little submarine and going into the thoughts, the emotions, the physical body. And then I can kind of trace through that awareness down through the body to see where the areas of blockage are. And I can see disease, I can see fears, traumas, addictions. And when I go into those, each of those, there's a lot of data. And so usually it's cellular memory, and usually it's some sort of something that the person experienced in the past that they're compensating for now. And then I do work to, I have a healthy practice and I do a lot of psychic surgery. And so help to clear a lot of those blocks and help people to really integrate their trauma.
It seems like most of us have some type of trauma that is holding us back in life. For people who are wanting to, start the process like you did, how could they start working through their trauma?
The first thing is really just to be honest with ourselves about what we're up to in terms of coping. Okay. There's a huge, street drug world out there. But even more prevalent are pills. This culture is heavily, heavily medicated. Alcohol, and shopping, and like tech addiction. So just looking at and getting honest with like, okay, I'm numbing myself out. However, some are more severe. Mainlining heroin or meth is a little more severe than like, smoking a cigarette or whatever, but like it's all kind of doing the same thing, right? It's like compensating. And so getting honest with ourselves, having courage and being compassionate with yourself. Like, we've all been through things. We've all been through things. And it takes courage to finally hit that point where we say, okay, like enough. I have to do something different. So having the compassion and then the willingness to start to do things differently. Okay. And I always advocate first getting into the body, because most people are quite disassociated. They don't even live in their body. They're so busy in their mind and they're just running, 100 miles an hour and constantly go, go, go. And it's a very external reality that we're living in. So we got to come down and in to the body to really begin to somatically heal. Like talk therapy is cool and all, but we actually, the trauma lives in the cells. That's where it is. It's in the body, in the cells. So we have to connect to that by first grounding down in the body. So something as simple as going outside for a walk, taking some deep breaths. I really advocate yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, there's any number of things. Acupuncture is very good for that. Then once you get into the body, you can, and really are honest with yourself about, okay, drinking this much or this many Xanax or Oxys or whatever they're doing, like maybe I could cut back. Maybe I could do it a little different, and starting to make the changes from there. Then of course, reaching out, getting some help is always a good thing, especially if people aren't super self-connected and have no idea where to go with it.
Thank you. And I'm just curious. I mean, do you ever hear music, or is there ever music associated with any of the experiences that you've been through?
Yeah, sometimes if I had a woman who her son, he committed suicide, but ultimately he was overdosed on drugs in hospital and like had kind of a psychotic break and jumped off a bridge. And when I was working on her, I was hearing musical notes around, or I was hearing music around her. And I was like, I just shared with her. I was like, so, what's up with this? And she just burst into tears because her son was a musician and loved the song that I was hearing. So things like that can, come in from time to time.
As they relate to that experience. What are some of the most powerful experiences that you've had?
Oh, girl, in which regard?
I don't know. You can pick any.
Oh, there's many a rabbit hole we could go down here. No, honestly, I think it's just the odyssey of like putting, I did the medic thing for a long time. And then as my gifts and abilities kind of continued to make more sense and I began to get educated, I started with my own kind of private little practice. I was just working on friends. I didn't know what I was doing at the time. And ultimately, kind of got a good handle on that. And then intuitively knew I needed to write this book. And I did not want to do it because I put Like my guides, my intuition was like, you have to put all your dirt in there, like all your skeletons, everything. And I was like, oh my God, are you serious? Come on now, But I did. And I am so glad that I did, because what's happening, and I just, put it out there, and it's just kind of taken on a life of its own. And I'm so glad that I did, because what I'm hearing more than anything, yes, there are a lot of energetically sensitive people that are closeted and fearful. And even more so, though, are, people that have a lot of shame about what they've done or what they've been through. And so by kind of just putting it all in there and being like, yeah, this is what I did, and this is how I navigated through it, and this is what I'm doing now, it's kind of that inspirational story, of like, wherever you are, no matter how messy, no matter how broken, no matter how like jacked up things are for you, like, you can shift it. You can take the pain and the trauma and the darkness and alchemize it into wisdom. And really, that's the primary message of Journey into Grace.
That's such an empowering thing, because I'm sure so many people are going, gosh, I don't even want to admit some of these things to myself. And
Yeah.
then here you are, you're an open book when it comes to your book, Journey into Grace.
Yeah. And, here I was thinking I was this lone weirdo, right? Like heavily closeted for 25 years. Come to find out now, and this is just one of the documented, statistics, it's probably actually more, but there's 15 to 20% of the world's populace is energetically sensitive. And that's 1.6 billion people, 55 million in the US alone. And those are just the ones who will say it, And my understanding, when I say energetically sensitive, it's being able, like, maybe they see the number one thing is feeling. Okay. So people feel everybody's stuff. The empaths, the ones who absorb everything like a sponge, they kind of comprise the largest sector of that. And then we have clairvoyance, which is, one of mine. And clairaudience is a scary one, because that's hearing voices. And who wants to say that in this culture? We'll get locked up and shot up with Thorazine and Haldol, So it's like people are still a little gun shy about it. But I've come across so many people now, physicians, plastic surgeons, tons of nurses. Oh my gosh, nurses are so much. Everyday, soccer moms and business professionals. I've even had some IT people and neuroscientists. And so it's prevalent through all walks. And I think that I understand my dharma now is to bridge the mainstream with the energetic and holistic world in a way that makes sense and is like really practical and applicable. I'm not super into the etheric woo stuff. It's like, yeah, if that works for you, cool. But for me, I'm all about like landing it. Like, how's it going to help you in this life right now? And if we just take away the fear, we can soften the stigma. We can land it in a way that makes sense to people. We can provide language that makes sense, tools that make sense. And that really, I'm all about helping them to become empowered within their own gifts, their own light.
Well, let's say because there's so many people out there that have a level of giftedness and sensitivity. Let's say that they're not quite sure how to even develop that, or to allow themselves to improve on their psychic gifts and, sensitive gifts. How would they even start?
Number one thing is stillness, being able to have some quiet space to disconnect from the external stimulus. Be curious. Just be curious at first how the information comes into you. Again, so we'll take someone who's a really deep feeler. You go into a crowd, it's really rough. Somebody walks in the room, you just know, what their thoughts are, what they're feeling, whatever. So the number one thing we want to understand is that our nervous systems are wired just a little differently, in that they're roughly 2 to 3 times as sensitive as, quote, the standard person. There's no such thing as normal, but standard person. So our nervous systems are like really sensitive. So one, we want to decrease stimulus, start to be curious about how the sensitivities come in for you, have the courage to come down into your body, and then understand that the nervous system it plays a huge part in your gifts. And so there's so many people that feel like they're being like electrocuted right now with what's happening collectively. And so we want to support the nervous system, so all things, ashwagandha or CBD or magnesium or, whatever it is for the individuals. But those are kind of the first recommended steps. Is it's okay to be scared. It's okay not to know how to do it. But then it's like, okay, do you see? Okay, my data comes in off the left side of my head on a screen, and it looks very much like a computer monitor, like a hologram, right? So that's how I get my data. So if you see things, just notice what you see. Notice if it's always there or if it only comes from time to time. Notice if you hear. Do you hear in your left ear or your right ear? Is it a masculine voice or a feminine voice? Is it English or a different language? Is it a tone or is it music? And we just start to get curious, right? We can go down all of the different gifts with that. And then it's like, the more willing you are to be in your body, the more powerful you will be energetically and psychically, because it's in direct proportion. Your willingness to go down and in will expand your awareness up and out. Does that make sense?
It sure does. And, thank you for going over that, because I'm sure there are a lot of people going, gosh, I know I'm highly intuitive, or I see, or I smell, or I can taste different things, but I'm not even sure where to start on all that.
Yeah. Well, and here's another really important thing. Since the feelers, empaths, clairsentients, and are kind of the biggest, those guys usually come in, I call them undiagnosed empaths, and they usually come in with complaints of lethargy, fibromyalgia presentation, IBS, constipation issues. It's kind of like a lot of them are carrying extra weight, usually around the middle. And they're like, I'm doing everything. I just can't lose this weight. And when we go in, it's like, oh, I see it, because the solar plexus right above the navel is one of the most powerful centers for where the higher frequencies lodge in our body. It's why it's called the gut feeling, right? And the solar plexus goes right across the transverse colon. Okay, so the colon, and it's, again, culturally, we're just inside out and backwards. Like the colon and GI health with the microbiome is paramount in your physical health and wellness. So I see these people absorbing everybody else's energy, right? Bogged down under like what looks like, a pile of heavy blankets is what it looks like in their auric field. And they're just like, I just can't, I'm not happy. I'm just so lethargic and I'm just like moving like a slug. I don't know what's going on. And it's like, oh, I see what's up. So then we go in, we teach them, we'll clear them out first and help them like clear out the solar plexus. And then get them moving towards balancing the gut biome. So there's colon hydrotherapy is wonderful. You can do intermittent fasting, pre and probiotics. Like the gut biome feeds the entire, or all of the organ systems are fed off of the gut biome. It's like the second brain in the body. And our food isn't real food in this culture. So people are just bogged down. So it's both physical and energetic, right? But that's one thing I see like daily from people all over the world that are sensitive, is the endocrine system issues, nervous system issues, and GI issues. So if that's you guys, just start, clearing it out, and you can feel a lot better.
So there's definitely hope there.
So much so.
So what is it like when you work with somebody, either in person or let's say remotely?
It's really fun. So the way that the distance stuff works, and I'm hooking up with Gaia TV and doing a lot of stuff now. So it's so fun because now I'm seeing people from all over the world, right? And I just love that because it's like I'm still a paramedic. Like you still never know, where are we going today? What are we going to get? And the way that distance works is something called quantum entanglement. So in quantum physics, and we're not going to get way into this, but there's two particles separated by a huge distance, and one minute is manipulated and they both, jiggle around. Well, Newtonian physics can't explain that, but quantum physics, it makes, sense. And so energy workers are working in the quantum and subtle fields. So when somebody gives me permission, which they're doing if they get a session or whatever, like boom, it's like they're standing in front of me. I can see their entire, uh, physical and energetic body, and the same amount of data. And so people come in for all kinds of reasons. I get the people that have been to every doctor and still gotten no, diagnoses or no help, and they're just sick of taking pills or whatever. I see people that have gone through severe trauma and addiction. And I see a lot of sensitives that are just trying to figure out how to navigate. And I see a lot of spiritual crises, if you will, like plant medicine overdoses and kind of psychotic break types of things. And so it's whatever's up for that person. We'll just chat about it at first. And then I do the energetic clearing portion. So for me, it's not any one modality. There's like so many, to me, they're all branches of the same tree, right? They're all valid. You've got Bowen, Reiki, craniosacral, quantum touch, psychic surgery, medical intuition. There's all of these different modalities, and they're all relevant. So I take from my kind of toolbox and apply it to whatever that person's individual needs are. So at the minimum, their entire auric field will be cleared, which is oftentimes feels to them like they lost 1,000 pounds, right? And then I'll go into whatever body system is holding the trauma and help them to it's not about getting rid of, okay? Because there's wisdom in the pain for the person. There's something there. But we want to bring it to the surface in a way that their consciousness and their psyche can handle, right? So it's almost like pressure washing people or like rotorating people is what it looks like to me, but it's really a total system reset. So auric field clearing, hemisphere balance, chakra realignment, meridian flush. So that just in and of itself is like a total reboot. And that's just the base though. And then I'll go into wherever your specific system is, holding whatever it is. And we'll get into that. And then I love to give people tools and homework and protocols, because it's like, for the longest time I wrestled with being like this. And then in the spiritual world, I've found that there's, honestly, if I'm just frank, I've found more ego in the spiritual world than in the fire department. And that's saying something. I've come across a lot of people that are super identified with being like special or powerful or whatever. And to me, it's like I've been burned to the ground so many times and gone through so many lessons with all of this that it's not like I matter as a person for myself, yes. But it's not, their process isn't about me. It's about getting them to remember their own power, right? To learn how to connect to their own power, because they are infinitely powerful beings, right? We all are, just buried in our stuff. And so that's kind of how a session goes for me. Giving people tools and homework then gives them like a ladder, or like a trail map. Because my job, I'm still very much psychic paramedic turned holistic first responder. My job is to like pull you out of the ditch, get you completely triaged and stabilized energetically and physically, and then give you a game plan so that you feel empowered, so that you know where to go on with your life.
I think that's so important. My goodness, what a just empowering way to approach life and to move through life and be able to be responsible for our own healing.
Yeah, because ultimately, healers need healers. Everybody could use, everybody can benefit from help. All of us can. And ultimately, we as the individual have to walk through the door. We as the individual have to walk the path on our own. Right. And that was the thing that way back when I was off the rails and overdose, and I came out of that rock bottom, and I had that pivotal realization of nobody's going to do this for you. And I was so mad because I was like, nah, it's like I had felt so victimized and traumatized by life and everything that I had been through. And I could look around and see all these examples of how everybody else had it so much better. And so I was jaded, and I was like, somebody should do this for me. Like, I deserve it. Right. Well, that was my biggest snag. I had to get over that. I had to accept the fact, like, no, girl, yes, you've been through all of that. Yes, that sucks. Right. Yes, the deck was like double stacked against you. Right. And what are you going to do about it for yourself? And that changed everything for me. And so that's really what I advocate for people is like, because again, everybody's doing the best they can. And we have a lot of kind of a hyper glorification of the staying victimized, staying disempowered. And it's like that serves a purpose. And if you want better, if you want to change your life, it boils down to what you are willing to do for yourself, ultimately.
Love that. Well, Sarah, my goodness, we could talk all day. I just loved your book, Journey into Grace. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
You guys can find me on sarahkgrace.com. So that's SarahKgrace.com, sarahkgrace.com. And we've got YouTube, Sarah K. Grace. I've got a sweet little online membership community. It's called the Grace Place. And we have people from all over the world that are energetically sensitive and coming together to become empowered. So you can find that through the website too. Oh, and Journey into Grace is on Amazon. And I just recorded it in audio. So I'm hoping to have it out in May because I'm doing Gaia with Regina Meredith, and that comes in May. So we got a lot of cool things going on, girl.
Hey, I cannot wait to hear that audiobook. I'm looking forward to that. Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Journey into Grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic. We're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.